And we are live, Splitting Hairs, episode 7. Hi, Annabelle.
Hello.
We've got a really weird topic today.
Yeah, it's not really a myth there. It's just a grievance. So.
It is. It's one of my grievances, but I'm still not sure why it bothers me so much. So hopefully this session will help clear my head about it.
Yeah, so let's call this counselling session 1.
Yeah, great. So look, we're struggling with a title too because I'm going to have to use a particular soloist to demonstrate my ideas. And that soloist is Anne-Sophie Mutter.
Legend.
And yeah, and this is great because Annabelle thinks Anne-Sophie Mutter is a legend, and I, whilst understanding the phenomenal nature of her, feel like she set an example that doesn't agree with my philosophy of music interpretation. So you can see how complicated this episode's going to be. But look, let's just break it down, build it up, see what comes out at the end. Okay, go. Your impression of Anne-Sophie Mutter in terms of how she interprets music. Let's go.
All right, so pre-talking to you about Anne-Sophie, it was always just, you'd have those list of names of top soloist violinists. Someone might say Heifetz, someone might say Perlman. I would always say, amongst other people, Anne-Sophie.
Yeah, she's up there for sure.
And can I just say also Ivry Gitless, may he never die.
Yeah.
I think he's like 98. I think he can make it to another 198. I don't know. Anyway,
He probably will.
He probably will. He'll outlive us all. Anyway, Anne-Sophie was just always on that list for me. And I always describe her, she's just a beast on violin.
There's no doubt about it. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
So after we would talk about it, because she came here and she played in Melbourne, and I was all like, absolutely just enjoyed every second of that. No, that's not true. 98% of it, because she played trike, and a part of it I was like, all right, fine, that's how you want to play trike. But it was just more like, once you get to that level of soloist and that name, it's just the aura of that person. It's just like, you can do no wrong. That's not true, but you can do no wrong.
You can do no wrong. Yeah, that's right.
So for me, it's, yeah, she's just one of those legendary violinists that I got to see in person, and I have listened to. So let me carry on. Now, having learnt from you and understanding what you think about her and what she represents, I have listened to her in a new light and gone, oh, okay, yeah, and I'll explain later what that piece was that really did my head in.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's just one of those names where it's just like, yeah,
She's an absolute legend, and she totally deserves it. So now that this is public, I'm going to be much nicer about the whole thing than I would be if the microphone was turned off. But look, I don't want to be mean about anything because it comes across as sour grapes. I'm a nobody compared to Anne-Sophie Mutter. I am absolutely nobody, and I'm happy. I'll freely admit that. But what I have to do in my life is try and convince students to become useful, because not everyone of them is going to be a soloist. Because the soloist occupies this very interesting world where they can do no wrong and they can do what they want. But is that what I'm supposed to be telling my students how to play? So that's where the dilemma comes from for me.
So I think this myth that we haven't really quite worded, it stems from like a time where the soloists, and maybe I'm going off track and you want to fix that.
No, not at all.
The soloists used to be the composer of the piece.
Well, that's an incredibly good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was, I believe it to be a cultural shift in how music was written and the type of music that was written that just moved performers into only being performers.
That's a bloody great point, Annabelle, if I may say.
So for me, I do have my, when I think of somebody playing a piece of music or a soloist, it's twofold. It's what piece are they playing and who's playing it, and there's a division between that.
Gosh, that's right, isn't it?
So as an example, I really do love the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, and I can listen to all the amazing soloists play it, but I just have my favorite person playing it, my favorite recording of it, and that's it. And I searched high and low for a really, really great recording of it, and by that an interpretation of Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, and I settled on Max and Wenger of playing it with with not Chicago, Berlin Phil. So it's twofold for me when it comes to. So I've heard, again, I can listen to Anne-Sophie, and then have things she's played that I've been like, I don't like her interpretation of that. Doesn't take away that she's an amazing violinist, but there's the piece of it. So there was just a shift, and I think that's led to soloists sort of saying, well, this is my interpretation of how I'm playing this piece, and we've lost the fact that what they're playing isn't actually their piece.
Yeah, so in the 19th century, you had people who could play their own concertos. The composers could play their own concertos, and they reached incredible celebrity by performing the works that they composed. Therefore, they are allowed to play it however they want because they wrote it.
Yeah.
So then there's that split that happens in the late 19th century where music was too hard to play, or a pianist composed it. Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, there you go. And he's all writing the most difficult concerto ever written, and the violinists at the time were like, no, I'm not playing that. So all these conceptual concertos started to be written by composers who couldn't play them anymore. So then as you say, the soloist is born. The soloist only is born.
Yes, but before it became what it is now, there was a real partnership between the composer and the soloist. I remember reading...
Oh, like Brahms' concerto.
Yeah, and I think Mendelssohn, I think it might have been Joachim, and I'll double check that. But it was, talking to the composer as to how they want it to be played, and things like that. I think there was more of that back then. And then it really took off as to, well, if the composer's no longer around, they're all dead.
Yeah, and we're obsessed with old music as well. So we're more likely to buy a ticket for Tchaikovsky concerto with a modern day celebrity like Anne-Sophie Mutter than to care what the latest concerto that's been written sounds like. So that's also a phenomenon of our time where we're obsessed with old stuff. So that keeps this personality showbiz persona really in the limelight. But that's a hangover from the early 20th century where individuals became really famous for their personality and for their radical interpretations of music.
Yes,
and each soloist had a different personality. So you were more focused on the personality or the style of the soloist rather than the interpretation of their music. And I think that's a problem because then you've got kids who are learning music. They're not caring what happened in Tchaikovsky's time. They're caring how Anne-Sophie Mutter played it.
Yeah. So it really does become, I'm listening to, it's the same with actually not just concertos and soloists, with orchestras. I'm listening to this recording. Oh, who's playing it though? And that might draw a line in the sand for you. And I certainly have particular recordings of particular pieces that I like, but I've never soloed out one orchestra being the be all and end all for that particular piece. I've never thought that same with a soloist. Like it's just, I can't quite word it, but it becomes more about who's playing it.
Yeah, instead of the music, but it doesn't have to be about the music anymore because everyone knows the Tchaikovsky concerto by ear from memory. Everyone knows it so well. It's not an interesting new, shocking, radical thing to hear. It's not like, oh, what an amazing piece. It's like, this bit. Oh, yeah, this bit's great.
But it's, well, you say that like it's a bad thing, but that can be a good thing.
Oh, look, I love it when Tchaikovsky comes up at work because I don't have to practice it. It's fantastic. Brahms is the same. What else? It's a bit of a problem when Korngold comes up. No, Brooke, I can fall asleep and play it. Even Scottish fantasy. Yeah, so it's fine from a practical point of view. I love it.
But I think because what you've just said about the audience sits there going, oh, yes, this bit, it sort of leads us to marvel in that the person who's playing it because it is exceptionally difficult, that music. So the audience is there going, what a great piece of music. Hopefully, this is what they're saying. Hopefully, what a great piece of music, but how it was played. Like, it takes a lot to be able to play that piece and to play it well. So you're marveling in who's playing it and how it's played and then the music itself.
Yeah, that's right. And look, as you say, Anne-Sophie...
And I'm a nerd, so I'll always have that interpretation. Sorry.
Yeah. So look, Anne-Sophie came to play Tchaikovsky and It was just, it was just crazy. It was like,
All right, it's an
you
honest
can't
discussion.
relax, okay? You can't relax. It's like when, for completely different reasons, it's like when Nigel Kennedy comes to town. It's like you know that you can't not pay attention. Like you just have to sit up straighter. You have to watch. You have to listen. There is
hasn't been around
no
forever.
relaxing. There is no relaxing when he's around. And besides that, he basically fires the conductor and does it all himself. So you literally have to follow what he's doing. And that kind of irritates the public service mentality that we have. We just want to go to work and relax, for goodness sake. You know, sometimes walking onto the stage is the most relaxing time of my day.
No walking off the stage.
No, on, believe me, sitting down and that Tchaikovsky concerto starts and I'm like, I can relax now because you know it from memory. But no, Nigel Kennedy, Anne-Sophie, Ivry Gitlis, all these people who really do it their own way. And, you know, as you say, is it a bad thing? It's probably not actually a bad thing, but it makes it really hard to copy because what are you copying? And should you copy someone's distinctive personality or should you try and go back to the drawing board and see what the composer felt? Because actually there's so much personality, cult, showbiz, ego in soloists now that the only way you can make your own mark is if you do something really radically different. So actually going back to the drawing board and seeing what's on the page might end up being the most radical thing that you can do. So that's a kind of, look, that's what I want people to sort of think about if they're, how do I interpret this? Well, I've got my favorite recording. Maybe I'll just copy that. Yeah, that's a start. I've said in other shows, copy, and then find your own way. But at what point, where are you getting your information about your own way? So yeah, it's definitely a hard one. It does disturb me.
Can I read you a quote from Ivry Gitlis?
I love him. Let me tell you about my masterclass with him after you've read the quote.
Oh, I love that story. Okay. Dear young colleagues of the up-and-coming generation, please have the courage to be yourselves, to take risks and not be copies of recordings or others. Practice your instrument in order to free yourself from any psychotechnical constraint, to be able to create when you play. Ooh, creativity. See episode 3. Listen to your inner ear, which is connected directly to your heart and spirit. The one that tells you what to feel is you, and the one you don't feel isn't you. Remember that a beautiful wrong note by Chrysler, a Thibaud, Cassels, or Calais is worth more than 1,000 so-called right notes, and that playing that that is hygienically and clinically correct is not necessarily a sign of good health. Take heart, good health to you.
God.
I read that quote years ago and I'm just like, yes, because what you've just said about like listening to soloists is if you only listen, and this is a recording thing as well, if you only listen to the one, you're going to copy that recording and that soloist's interpretation of it. And I heard my friend, I do love him, but he played this piece, meditation, Ty's meditation.
Yep.
And it was so obvious that he listens to Maxim Vengerov.
Yep.
So we were just like, all right, just, yes, you can listen to soloists and how they play it, but it's your turn to sort of, without disregarding what's on the page.
Or at least, and we covered this in another episode too, at least recognize that soloist is from a particular time period with particular fashion as to how to play the violin. Vibrato, whooshy bows, big slow bows. There's all these little things that change over time, and we've got to bear those in mind too. What's the fashion now? Anyway, let me tell you about my Ivry Gitlis story. It was one of my great regrets what happened in this.
I love this story.
In this masterclass. Like I've
not heard it before.
I was lucky enough to have to do really so many masterclasses with so many famous people because Anthony Camden, who was an English guy, he came to the Queensland Conservatorium and he was so famous in England. He was the oboe player who played Gabriel's oboe. Yeah. And so he got quite famous, and he also was famous for setting up the Musicians Union in the UK, something like that. Anyway, so he comes to Australia for a holiday, like they all do, and he's the Dean of Music at the Queensland Conservatorium. And he, because he knew so many famous people, he just brought them all to Australia for masterclasses. So it was Igor Oistrakh, Ivry Gitlis. This happened in Hong Kong too. He popped over to Hong Kong and was the Dean of Music there, and he brought all these amazing people. Isaac Stern, David Stern, heaps of people. Anyway, Ivry Gitlis. And, you can probably tell by my personality that I was a pretty cocky youngster. So I go in there. I don't even remember what I was playing, and it didn't even matter because after 5 minutes he stopped me and he goes, "All right, how do you warm up?" And I'm like, oh my God, in the back of my head, I'm like, I don't warm up. What am I going to tell him? I'm going to have to lie in public. So I said, I practice my scales and then I move to studies and then I get on with my pieces. And he went, no, you must be able to get up in the middle of the night and play Paganini. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what I do. Like, that was actually the way I practiced. I was so annoyed with myself that I didn't just say to him.
Serves you right for lying,
I know,
Sarah.
absolutely. The lesson here is
don't lie. You
don't
should have known
lie.
who you were talking to as well.
And I didn't then.
Brilliant.
I didn't know who he was. There wasn't the internet then. I'm like, who's this crazy guy,
It's crazy. I love everything about him. He's
I know.
So funny.
And he's definitely got his own personality. So look, yeah, okay, we love personality. We do. But it's we've got to work out how they came to their decisions as how to play that piece. So Anne-Sophie comes to Melbourne and we play Tchaikovsky Concerto. And she was actually impossible to follow. Now, what's the motivation there? I want to know. Look, if I was a famous person, I would contact her agent and I would say, I have one question for Anne-Sophie Mutter. What is her motivation for making it so utterly impossible to follow her on stage? Where does that mentality come from? And I ask that sincerely and with great respect. Why is her motivation to detach herself from the orchestra in such an extreme way? What possible motivation could there be for that?
First, you have to ask, does she think she's doing that? Does she think she's detaching herself, or is she thinking, I'm playing and they better be following me?
I guess the mentality is it's up to the conductor to make the orchestra follow the soloist. Yes.
I can't think of his name and it's killing me, but who was the guy that... Oh, Elman.
Mm-hmm.
He was in an interview and he sort of said, us of a certain generation, soloists, sort of... He used the word, we have the right to think the way we do. When it comes to, and I just sort of... When I first heard that, I was just like... You have so much standing because you're a soloist and no one's saying you can't play or you don't know what you're talking about. But to say you have the right, it's sort of like, I've heard that people are considered, better soloists if they come at it from a point of view of like chamber playing and really working with the orchestra and stuff.
Yeah, James Ennis is like that. James Ennis is like that.
Janine Janssen's one of them as well.
Yeah. But they're the new phase. They're not part of the old guard. They're the new kind of soloist.
Maybe there's a shift. Again.
Yeah, possibly. And the scaling down of things. And James Ennis comes now and plays a bit of Vivaldi. He doesn't have to come and play Elgar anymore to get big audiences. I mean, he probably will again, but
Elgar Violin Concerto is great. But once you've heard the Elgar Cello Concerto, you're like, why even bother with the violin?
Yeah, because you have no patience being a young person, and the Elgar Cello goes for about 15 minutes, and the Elgar Violin goes for about an hour.
It's not the patience thing at all. I was just listening to Alpine Symphony before we got on this call and going over the score. That's like 50 minutes long.
Yeah, but it's like, I'm going up a mountain and now I'm coming down a mountain, and I can understand because there's a storyline. I'm just
talking about comparative writing. Same with Dvorak Cello Concerto and Dvorak Violin Concerto. Those are the two violin concertos I'm just like, Once you've heard the cello ones, it's like,
Yeah, but whatever. That's once you've played them all too many times, you're like, where's the new concertos, please? Anyway, so what do I teach you guys is the point. What sort of an example am I supposed to set? Like, how? If you're all obsessed with these people who do whatever they want, what am I supposed to do as a teacher? Yeah. Well, don't tell me there's no solution to this. Okay, let's talk about what I want to do. I want people to make a difference between different time periods where music was written. So not, for example, not to play the Brahms concerto the same way as you would play a Bach concerto, because that's part of the old guard as well. They play everything in the same way, lots of vibrato and lots of sostenuto and all of that, right? So there's no acknowledgement that different equipment was used and different, there were different social attitudes to things, like music was used and consumed very differently in the different time periods. Like, Mozart, everyone used to just pervert each other in the audience and barely notice the stage, And then Wagner comes along and goes, no, we're turning off the house lights because none of you are paying attention to the stage, you pathetic audience that doesn't know anything about music. Now face the stage, shut up, and pay attention to my great genius.
Yeah, but he still hit the orchestra.
Yeah, but that's because he was only interested in what he had to say, right? But the orchestra, yeah, even if it's on the stage, it's not really about the orchestra. Well, not to Wagner anyway. Yeah, so fashions change. I guess that's what we're saying. Fashions change, and a soloist preserving the music of the past, I believe, has some kind of responsibility to communicate some sentiment from that period. Or at least to know, a tiny little bit about why it was being written, how it was being written, what was the purpose of it being written? Why do we even still play it? Like that's another one. Why do we still play Mozart? Why don't we think about who else was writing music at the time? Let's play someone else. And it's not just there was only Salieri because the movie said so. It's more composers than that. How about Haydn? I mean, hello, Haydn. Everyone obsesses about Mozart. They forget about Haydn. Haydn was great. Yeah. Anyway, look, I think it's clear what I'm trying to say. I admire the great soloists. I admire the old school, but I also believe that their time is sort of coming to an end.
The soloists, sorry?
Yeah, like the way they interpret music, possibly that fashion is changing now. And I think that's a good thing. Like, we can appreciate what they've done, what they've produced, the work they've done, the passion that they've brought to it. I can't possibly fault that. The commitment that they have to music. I mean, Anne-Sophie is amazing. She came on stage and she has charisma. She is amazing. And she spoke to the orchestra like, I mean, she wasn't really happy with the way we were sounding, I guess. And she just said, she just described what she wanted a little bit more out of the accompaniment. I mean, it's something, if we're sitting there going, oh God, it's just Tchaikovsky again, God. And then she sang all this beautiful stuff. It's like, oh, okay. She's sort of like Simone Young in that sense, where what Anne-Sophie wants, Anne-Sophie will get, and she'll ask for it until she gets it. And she's got that vibe about her. And like that's like Simone Young. She will not let go until you do what she wants. So I guess in that sense, it is all about the music for them. Who knows? So yeah, what do you think? See, this isn't your gripe, so you're just kind of like, yeah, whatever.
I'm just listening because I think what I said earlier was sort of the extent of which I think about it. There's a fashion of what concert is on, what concerto is being played, and who's playing it. And I've certainly heard big name people play things and I've gone, I don't like how you played that. And I have a list of names that I won't share, but I'd go and hear their Sibelius and I would run away from hearing their Mozart.
Yeah.
Because it's how they learn, it's how they play, it's how they see it, and it's it's completely, you know, I don't want to say it's completely void of, but there has just been this move away from what the composers really thought about, I guess.
Well,
and their intentions.
No, I'll flip that. There is a new ideal now happening, and that's why it's hard to accept the old school just as it is. Like that's changing. People are becoming more interested in what equipment they use, gut strings, you know, all that stuff that does make a difference. And so some of us are into that. And it is really hard to sort of appreciate both sides. And I don't want to be one of those people that's a radical. I mean, I teach Bach on modern to modern people, i.e. people without the Baroque equipment, but I teach them what I believe is the phrasing based on what it would have meant at the time, as far as I know it. Like, I'm not an expert, but I've experienced enough different groups, you know, different recordings, different books about the fashions of those times and the equipment, that I want to make a difference in my own playing, and I do want to communicate that difference to my students. Why? Because it's like a history lesson, as well as just play whatever composer you want, however you want. Like, I don't think that's a responsible way of teaching now, because there is so much more information available now about this stuff than there was when Anne-Sophie was growing up. So whilst I love her impact, I can't 100% support the idea that all music should be viewed as something that you can just express your ego through. So that's how I feel about it in a nutshell. And, you know, it would be really interesting to hear what other people think about this topic, because it is very polarizing and it is a difficult topic, and it is hard to not come across like it's just sour grapes. Like, I mean, as if I wouldn't want to be Anne-Sophie Mutter. I mean, she's a babe. She's an amazing gun. She can play everything. Listen to me whinging about her. So you know, please don't take it the wrong way. It's not like, oh, I don't like it. It's like, no, but it makes it really hard for me when people play like that and get famous.
Yeah, I'm just...
it's all right. It's not your gripe. I get it. It's mine.
I know, it's not mine. It's just...
Well, how would you like, if you had a student doing Bach now, what would you... I mean, I know you have a Baroque bow.
Look, it's what you've said to me a long time ago, because I asked you, where did you get your views on how to play Mozart, and you just said it's on the page. And when I look at any piece of music, like a Bach, like a page of Bach or whatever, I can see it. I can see where it is, which is why it baffles me when people play the opening of the G minor Adagio, that full chord. I don't understand how you can do that, or with vibrato. Or the C major Andante from the A minor sonata. Why people are adding slurs to that aren't there.
Yeah.
Why?
That's
and
an
I
interesting
made
one.
that mistake because somebody else said to do that. And I was like, oh, okay. Then I rubbed it out and you just went, it's not there. I'm like, oh, okay. And that's like, why would I do that?
Yeah.
Like, that one really bothers me. Bach is a good example of this. It's just, it's on the page. You can see what notes need more emphasis. You can see where the phrase is tailing off.
Yeah, you can only see that though if you've got a few of the little assumed, we'll call them rules for want of a better word, but the assumed way of playing certain things back in the day, we've lost that if all we concentrate on is constant vibrato and sostenuto. So we haven't got a hope in hell of even vaguely recreating what the musical fashions were of hundreds of years ago if all we learn as kids is sostenuto and constant vibrato with a modern bow. So yeah, it's like a really limited, like we were talking about in the other episode, it's a really limited education actually. And that's where the problem is that it's a limited education. And if you're getting a limited education, it means you're going to have a limited career. It means you're going to get a job in an orchestra. You know, fingers crossed you'll get a job, but every time an early music specialist comes, you're going to suffer because you don't believe in it, or you don't believe it's real. You think it's conspiracy theory that you have to tail off,
or you've
every slur.
Learnt it wrong.
Well, you believe you just can't do it, and that's actually a big problem. Is if you think you can't do something, then you'll just hate it.
Like the AMEB has when they do their exams, it's list A, B, C, and D, and it's always A is an early piece block, B is classical, C romantic.
Well, that
D,
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, 20th century or earlier, later.
Yeah,
and I will never forget. I was in a situation where this teacher was, this girl was playing a movement from Vivaldi Four Seasons, and the teacher just went, more vibrato. And I just thought...
I know, it's really unfair. I mean...
What?
This has got to stop. It really has to stop. More vibrato. Why? Because your teacher told you that.
So I always call things generational. So it's not that teacher's fault. It's how they were taught and so on and things like that. But yeah, I don't know.
Look, it's like still supporting agribusiness, knowing that it's destroying the land. You know what I mean? It's like knowing that something is debunked or shown to be not real, and yet still maintaining it because it's the only thing you've ever learned. It's incredibly inflexible. Like, my dad was so awesome, right? May he rest in peace. What a legend, right? My dad never, ever thought that we should do what we wanted. Okay, so Queensland Youth Orchestra, there's the score. He'd get the eraser out. He'd rub everything out and start again. And he'd do it in the parts as well. He would make us really search the parts. Why is that slur broken? Let's try it the way the composer wanted it. So I guess there's no.
Don't get me started on broken slurs.
Yeah, right. Well, we're going to do
any meme on our Instagram page. That's all from me.
I mean, it comes from a lack of understanding that music is a language with syllables and phrases and sentences and all of that.
And it also is, but I really want to finish this note on a down bow.
Yeah, those kinds of concerns. Making
it easier, but you've just,
Yes, letting the bureaucrat or the middle manager decide the artistic version of the music. It's like, oh, well, this is practical, so we're going to do this because we're running out of bow here, so we need to just take another bow because we want our bow speeds to be the same all the time, because that is what we've been taught. We've been taught a constant vibrato and a sostenuto, and that basically destroys music.
Were you taught that?
Yeah, well, I've always been insubordinate. So don't forget, I had countertenors and viola da gambas and harpsichords in my lounge room growing up. So I was always really skeptical of anyone who told me something that didn't sound good. But I think I suffered a lot because I didn't learn how to play in that way because I didn't like it. So I couldn't even do it. So I was on the opposite camp. I was like...
I'm sort of like half the same, but half not, because I don't remember being taught to sustain and use a lot of vibrato. I think it was just off the cusp in some of the lessons I had with some teachers, but it was never the forefront of what I was learning at the time. I don't remember, in those earlier years, them saying, use a lot of vibrato and all that kind of stuff.
Well, maybe you've blocked it out.
I saw it around me, but I don't. Do I use a lot of? Have I ever used a lot of vibrato around you?
No. But I'm saying you can't remember being told it.
Oh, yeah.
So you probably blocked it out.
Yeah, I don't know, but I definitely, maybe like you, but when I started seeing people around me use a lot of vibrato, maybe like I start to get uncomfortable because it's like in your soul it's not right. Yeah,
absolutely. And the thing about vibrato is that it's a thing that became fashionable, and it was in the early 20th century, and the French-ish started it, and then
held on to it.
Then the Russians got hold of it, and then the Americans solidified it. I mean, that's a ridiculous generalization on my part. But before, say, Izai, people did not use vibrato all the time. They just didn't. We've got recordings to prove it. Not even the singers used vibrato all the time.
You know that soloist, Steven Isserlis?
Well, he takes vibrato to a whole new level. He's great.
No, he did a video when he was an interview on vibrato when he was here in Australia.
Yeah.
And he said because he was here playing with ACO playing Shasta, and he's like, somebody came up to him after a concert and said, "Oh, you don't use a lot of vibrato," and he's like, he explained that it's a tool that adds to the phrase but doesn't, destroy it. And he gave an example. He's like, why would I play the opening of the slow movement of Shasta with every note with vibrato? And he played it. And to, I don't know, a certain type of person, you wouldn't notice it. You'd be like, oh, it's a really beautiful line. It's in tune. It's nice sound, whatever. And then he just demonstrated it using really carefully well-planned vibrato. And if you've got an ear for it, it's like that's the difference. And that's more beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's not to go on every note. And the dumbest thing you can do as a student, this is sort of going back to episode 6, don't practice vibrato on scales. I know people that, and I sent you this photo once, Sarah, somebody posted on Instagram. I'm practicing a vibrato exercise and they were using Bach as the example.
Oh. Oh my God.
So those are two things. It's just like you are setting yourself up for misery. Like that's just dumb. That's not even misery. That's not even a joke. It's just dumb. Scales that's supposed to be for intonation, and you're going to distort the intonation. And Bach, which you wouldn't use, if any, very, very, very minimal.
Yeah.
So not a full wide vibrato exercise on Bach.
Yeah.
There we found my grievance out of this. Out of today's conversation.
Yeah, I know. It's hard, and you don't want to come across like, well, maybe you do, but you don't want to come across like mean about it. People think they're doing what they can to get better as violinists or whatever. And
no, actually, it's what I said in episode 6, which was it's modern day students. That's how I categorize them. Thinking they need to because it's good. It's going to help them. So it's not coming out of a bad place. From them or myself, but it's just going like, oh my gosh, please.
And the whole time you you get the flat iron out and iron across all the detail and communication of Bach, you just get the iron out, just flatten it down like one of those big steamers that you put a whole suit in, like a press. You're just like pressing out all the detail because you're just putting this constant vibrato on this music that needs variety within the microphrase. I mean, it's actually
it's actually harder to practice a simple line of music and get the cleanest, like the most clearest sound out of every single note from start to end of the duration of that note with no vibrato. And that takes bow control. And
as soon as you start bringing in the vibrato, you got to press the bow down. You try doing vibrato with a light bow.
Yeah.
Just try it. It's just hilarious. Your bow will just start bouncing off the string.
Yeah.
So you got to start digging in. And that's great. And that's our style. Definitely.
Yes,
sometimes you need it. Yes.
Yeah. I think we've sort of gone onto a tangent about vibrato.
Well, yeah, haven't we? But we always go on a tangent. Look, let's sum up. I think we're done here. I want to title this, now that I'm going to say it, you have to title it. The Anne-Sophie Phenomenon is what this episode should be called. And
do you believe you've made your point?
Look, I believe that I'm hoping that people who listen will just have a think about not bringing down the past at all, but just questioning how we can really successfully interpret music that we didn't write without losing confidence.
Yes, I think, and the point I want to get across is that as the performer, you didn't write the music.
Yeah, so at some point it has to be about someone else rather than you. But that's just my personal feeling. So if you're struggling with playing like Anne-Sophie or playing like Ivry Gitlis or playing like Menuhin, if you're struggling to do that, then have a think about how, Beethoven or Brahms felt about their own music. See if you can find a new way by going back to the source That's really my only message.
If you want to
I
know
think,
what
today.
Brahms felt, Brahms wrote pure music only. The music has its own merit, stands on its own, you know? There's no program music. It's pure. That's it. So it's just on the page.
Yeah. Well.
And difficult.
Oh, you mean it doesn't have a... Yeah, but that was before, like, tone poems and crap like that.
Yeah, but that's
I just
specifically
said crap
Brahms.
like that. Yeah, but Brahms wrote, like... Hey, we're getting on a tangent.
Okay,
Not
sorry.
interested. Nah.
All right, we'll do a Brahms episode at some point.
We'll do a Brahms episode at some point. That would be really great. Okay, well done, Annabelle.
Okay.
Have a nice day.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.